I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
This evening we're in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to be starting at verse 19 in a few moments, but let's just quickly, since we stopped in the middle of the story, review what we've talked about so far. What did Nebuchadnezzar, who was king of Babylon, make as, not ideally worship to him, but what did he make? We're on page 9, by the way, Dion. You're looking for the page.
He made an idol so that people could bow down to and worship.
Okay. Now, how big was this idol? Do we remember? It doesn't. I'm not looking for exact measurements, but just exact. Like, how big was it?
2 tractor trailers.
Yeah, we said. Yeah, we said about 2 tractor trailers. If you were to take 2 tractor trailers and stand them up on end, that's how tall we're talking. I think it was 10-story building or something like that. When we're dealing with buildings, it's a large thing. You could see it from afar. It's not like this little mini statue where only the people who were right there could see it. No, this thing was huge. It was made of gold. And I said it really advanced how rich Babylon was and King Nebuchadnezzar was, to be able to make an image like that out of gold. And so when the people were to bow down to it, at what point in time were they to bow down to it?
They'd be notified through the instruments, the sounds of the instruments, be the call to...
Yeah. Like as far as, we know instruments are used to make different calls to different things. You have a trumpet used to lead an army in the old days. A bugle would be used as a wake-up call for soldiers, and there would be a specific sound that you would hear. At a funeral, sometimes you hear taps played, and we understand, okay, so, time of silence, like as far as memorial. We know that from just how we use instruments. So I'm sure when you heard the instruments, it was a specific call. All right, anyone who could hear the instrument could see the image. That's how big it was. And so they were to bow down to it. Now, everyone did that except for 3 people in the story. Which 3? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these were 3 of Daniel's friends. We said last week, we don't know where Daniel was. If Daniel was here, he would have been in one of those things too. But we sometimes forget that just because the image was set up in Babylon didn't mean that people in other places would have to bow down to this image. They couldn't see it. They couldn't hear the trumpets. And so, we understand even in our ceremonies that we have, that where there might be something going on in Toronto, but people up in Newmarket have no idea what's going on because they're in a different place. Well, if you were in Babylon, you heard the sounds of the instruments, and you were told you were to bow down. Now, maybe you had come from afar and you were in Babylon, but if you were there and you heard the instruments, you were to bow down. And these 3 Jews did not. They did not. Because they knew that the people were there for serving idols. That's why the Jews were in captivity to begin with. So it wouldn't be very pleasing to God to continue serving idols while they were in Jerusalem. I'm not saying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did that, but the Jews in general were known for serving idols at that time. So it would be an affront to God. They weren't going to do it. Nebuchadnezzar, being Nebuchadnezzar, what did he do? What was the threat if you didn't do it, first of all?
Well, they were going to be burned alive, people. That was what he said when he gave the command.
Yeah.
At the beginning.
Yeah, so you were going to be burned alive in the fiery furnace. They were not going to kill you first and then burn your body, and they weren't going to cremate you that way. No, you were going to be thrown alive into the fiery furnace. I've never been on fire, like as far as I've never even burned. I've burned my hands or my arms like on the oven, but that's not the same as like having a fire on your hand or being burned in a fire. I've never had that happen, but I know it's horrific and very painful. And of course, we know you can die from it. And this fiery furnace is not just a campfire type thing. No, it was hot, as hot as you could get it. And these people were going to be thrown in there. Now, Nebuchadnezzar did something for these three men because of their position. What did he do? Once he heard that they didn't bow down.
We asked that the furnace be heated hotter.
Well, there was that,
Oh.
but before that,
He gave them kind of a second chance.
yeah, he gave them a second chance. We haven't gotten to that part yet. Verse 19 will tell us about the heat of the furnace. But he gave them a second chance. All right? We'll pretend that didn't happen. We'll pretend that you didn't know or whatever. Now you know, go do it. And they said no. We're not going to be careful how we answer you. We know that our God that we serve can deliver us. They didn't know whether or not physically they would be delivered. But if they weren't delivered, they know they'd be spiritually delivered for not obeying King Nebuchadnezzar. But they also knew that God could deliver them from the fiery furnace. Now, we didn't discuss this, we ran out of time last week. How do you suppose they knew that? Had they seen that happen before?
A fiery furnace, or just God?
In general, that God's able to deliver people.
Well, they experienced the power of God with Daniel in the dream. They prayed to God, and the prayer was answered.
Yeah. All right. So we've seen the dream. This had to have happened afterwards because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were made higher ups in governments after that story. So we knew that was before. We also know, though, that they didn't die when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem. God was able to save the righteous. They knew from their scriptures, which they would have had some of. God delivered David from the hand of the lion and the paw of the bear. God had been with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He had been with men like Samuel. They probably wouldn't have had, they might have had some records of the kings before, but of course, they were living the end of 2 Kings. They were living, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles wouldn't have been written yet, because that's probably written by Ezra. And so they knew, though, the older stories from the books of the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They knew how Israel had been delivered by God out of Egypt from the hand of the Pharaoh. So they knew God could do this. He had that power. They didn't know whether God would exercise that power. And that really is an important thing for us. Because we often look at scriptures and say, well, those people live differently than they do. When they knew, they experienced miracles and they experienced all these signs and visions and everything. We don't experience that today, so we think that they are different than us. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not know if God would physically deliver them. They had faith that they'd be spiritually delivered. But they did not know whether God would deliver them. He didn't reveal that to them. He didn't come down and say, don't worry, guys. I'm going to save you no matter what. So you can just stand tall before King Nebuchadnezzar and I will show my power. They knew God could do that, but they didn't know that he would. So let's start then at verse 19. We'll read through verse 27. We'll start with Naomi. We'll go back to Dion. And then back to Henry and up. 2 verses each, 19 through 27.
But Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace.
Verse 21, Dion, of chapter 3.
Then these men were bound in their coats, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace, because the king's order was urgent, and the furnace overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. The king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king.
Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire.
And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them.
Okay. So now we get to Bill, what Bill said earlier. He commanded that the heat of the furnace be 7 times more than it usually was heated. Now we know in Scripture, sometimes numbers have a symbolic meaning. And it wasn't just for the Jews. Eastern Mesopotamian religions used symbolic numbers. They used numbers to represent something. And so it's not that the Jews created this system and the Babylonians didn't have it at all, or the Assyrians didn't have it at all, or the Egyptians. No, they all did it. We do things differently today, maybe not with numbers, but we can do so with words and other things. We can use things to represent other things. So when he says that he wanted it turned up 7 times higher, was he literally saying, okay, all right, this is 100 degrees, now I want it 700 degrees? If that's not what he was saying, what was he saying?
Hotter than usual.
Yeah.
Than what it was.
Yeah, it was completeness. Remember, 7 usually represents completeness in Scripture. He wanted it completely hot as you can get it. That's how I want it hot. That's how much hotter I want it. Not a degree less. I want it completely hot because I want it to completely burn them. His fire, it almost says, I want this furnace as hot as my anger right in my fury right here. That's how furious he was. No one had ever told him no and lived. And certainly not his governors and people in his government. And so, how were these men thrown into the fire? The 3 men. Pardon me?
They were bound.
All right, they were bound. They kept like as far as he didn't strip them of their clothes. No, he bound them up. They were in their coats, their trousers, their hats or turbans, other garments, and they were just cast into the fire. Now the fire was so hot that what happened to the men who threw them in?
They were killed in the heat.
Yeah. must have been great for these men. They didn't do anything wrong according to Nebuchadnezzar here, just following his orders. And they had to get so close to the furnace, they burned up and died. But not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. Why was he astonished? There were a couple reasons.
First, he threw 3 and he saw 4.
Okay, so that was the first reason. We'll deal with the fourth and the 4 men in a second. What else was he astonished at?
Just walking around.
He's walking around there. I thought we bound these guys up. Shouldn't they be dead already? Shouldn't they be burned? They shouldn't be walking around freely. These other men that threw them in, they're dead. So yeah, the first thing I think that he was shocked at is these men are dead. Now, they hadn't been taken out yet, but he knew that something was going on here that was unusual, because these men should have been dead. And now then we get to 4, the 4 men. All right, so we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who's that 4th man? Sort of a trick question.
He might have thought like a son of a god,
Yeah.
of an idol god.
Yeah. He had to have come away thinking, okay, this has got to be a work of God. That doesn't mean it's the work of the true God, but he believed in idols. It has to be a work of God, because there's no way these men should be alive. And so I think Bill's on the right track. He thought it was the son of the gods, or at least like a deity of some sort. I've heard, and I don't know why I've heard this, but I remember when I was younger, having heard people suspect that this was Daniel. And I read the story, and I'm like, I don't know where people get that from, because it doesn't identify him as Daniel. You know, Nebuchadnezzar thinks it's the Son of God. Now, who do we automatically think of when we think of the Son of God? Pardon me? Jesus. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the one speaking here. Not Daniel, not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we have to keep in mind who's speaking. He just saw a 4th figure, thought it was a god. I'm not going to deny that it might have been God. I'm not going to deny that. But we don't know for sure. All we have are Nebuchadnezzar's words of what he saw. He saw 4 men, or at least he saw a 4th figure. We'll say that. He saw a 4th figure. And he didn't know what that was, but he thought it must be a god. After he saw that 4th figure, what did Nebuchadnezzar do?
He told them to come out.
Okay, and he called them to come out. Well, how did he refer to them in verse 26?
And now he might be thinking back to Daniel and Daniel telling him his dream, because now his mind is switched, seeing them alive, and he says that, calls them servants of the Most High God.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, he had already had this dream. Daniel had already interpreted this dream. Nebuchadnezzar knew about the God that the Hebrews served. And he knew that this was a powerful God, and he's even referred to him, and he will refer to him in chapter 4 as the Most High God. It doesn't necessarily mean that Nebuchadnezzar became a monotheist after this. Because even the Athenians in Acts 17 had an idol, had a inscription to the unknown God. When we read of the 10 Commandments, we sometimes will think that the first and the second commandment are one and the same. I am the Lord your God who led you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven images and bow down and worship to them. Those are the first 2 commandments, and we sort of tie them together, whereas they are 2 different commandments. Where one says, there's no other gods before me. That doesn't mean that there are other gods after me. There are no other gods. And you aren't to make any idols, whether it is to false gods or to me. That's what the difference between those two commandments are, is that God didn't even want idols to him. And so we know that the Hebrews understood about God. Most of them did. I don't think they were completely devoid of God. They just added other gods to the mix. They served Baal and Ashtaroth and all of these other gods from the peoples round about. And they added to the mix. Whereas God says, you will have no other gods before me. You will not stand before me and worship other gods. That's really what that's meaning. And so whether Nebuchadnezzar here, when he talks about the Most High God, we see it from our lens and say, Nebuchadnezzar believes in the true God. I believe he did, but not only. Not yet. And so that's why he had this idol made in the first place. He knew about the Most High God when he made the idol. But he understands, all right, this is a Hebrew God at work here. And all right, come out. And they came out. Now something was out of place, we might say, when these men walked out of the furnace. What did Nebuchadnezzar and them notice about these three men?
They're completely unaffected by the fire. They didn't even smell like fire, let alone have anything burn.
Yeah. Has anyone ever burned their eyebrows off accidentally? Or the hair on their fingers with a little fire? Wood stove, there you go, yeah. I burned the hair off my fingers off. I don't think I've singed my eyebrows. I don't play with fire that often. But I know people who have lost hair. Just a little fire, like hair is flammable, you'll lose it. And so, but I know I've singed my eyebrows on the barbecue. And so, or sorry, not my eyebrows, my fingers. But I know people who singe their eyebrows, singe their hair. Thrown into the fiery furnace, they didn't come out with singed hair. They didn't smell like fire. You don't even have to go into fire to smell like fire, to smell like the smoke. If you've ever been in the presence of someone who smokes cigarettes or cigars, you will walk out smelling, if you're in a closed room with them, smelling like cigarette smoke or cigar smoke. It is just an aroma that just clings to clothing. This was completely miraculous. These three men should have died. They didn't die. They were saved by God out of the fiery furnace. Now we come to verse 28 to 30. Tammy didn't get to read two verses, so she can get verse 28, and Naomi can get 29 and 30.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God.
Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Okay. So, Nebuchadnezzar being Nebuchadnezzar never misses an opportunity to make a proclamation. And so what was his proclamation here in verse 28? Before we get to what he says in verse 29. What does he say about God in verse 28?
Begins by saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach.
Oh yeah.
Meshach.
He starts out with blessed be the God. So he recognized it wasn't his gods that brought that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the fiery furnace. It wasn't his gods at all. It was failure to worship his gods that were thrown in there in the first place. He knew what his gods could do, and really, he knew they could do nothing. I really do believe that some idolaters understand that what they are worshiping is not real in some sense. There are some people who actually believe it. But Nebuchadnezzar is not a dumb man. He might believe in these other gods, but they can't do anything when it comes to the true God of heaven. So blessed be the God. Now, what did he says he sent his angel to deliver his servants. And we see angel, and what do we automatically think of when we think of angel?
Well, the messengers of God.
Okay.
That's about all
Yeah.
we know of certain stories where they
We'll meet angels. We'll meet the archangel Michael in this book, is it Michael or Gabriel? One of the two. I think it's Michael that we meet in Daniel. But we do meet of angels. But I would like us to note that the angel of the Lord here, even though the phrase isn't used here, some versions will have it capitalized here, can refer to God himself. If we go back to Exodus chapter 3, I'd like us to see this in the Old Testament, that the use of the word angel does not always mean what we think it means. Let's read. Dion, do you want to get Exodus 3 verse 1? Henry, you want to get Exodus 3 verse 2? Bill, you can get verse 3. And Tammy, verse 4 of Exodus chapter 3.
Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God.
Verse 2, yes.
And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed.
And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn.
So when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am.
Okay, so in verse 2, we have the angel of the Lord appeared in the midst of the flame of the fire. But God was the one who called out. I don't believe God spoke through this angel like his voice comes through his angel. We saw it in Genesis when God appeared to Hagar, the phrase, the angel of the Lord. When Jacob fought with the angel of the Lord and the angel put out his hip, he struggled with the angel of the Lord. It was God. We know that it was God in that passage. Jacob says so. And so in the Old Testament, we need to realize that angel of the Lord sometimes can mean God himself. God could have used an angel to deliver Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. I'm not going to deny that it could be an angel. But Nebuchadnezzar again is speaking, so we need to take that into acknowledgement that Nebuchadnezzar is the one proclaiming this. So that figure that was in the fiery furnace could have been God himself. And we understand God has taken the form, a form that we can see. The angels that came to Abraham were God. We know that angels went to Sodom and Gomorrah when Lot was there. But we know at least one of them was God. We know that from the passage in Genesis, I think it's 18. And so God can take human form. Of course, Jesus took human form when he came to this earth. But God can take human form without being born. But Jesus was born in this way because that's the way he had to be born to be that sacrifice. So Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel, delivered his servants. They frustrated the king's word, so he says, oh, who am I to argue with this God? He saved them. And he now understands the meaning when they said that we won't worship any other God. What was his proclamation in verse 29 therefore?
You can't speak against the God of them. And if you do, you'll be cut to pieces and your house burned.
Yeah.
It's very big on
Yeah.
spending.
Like as far as this is the typical threat for Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to die. And basically, I'm going to cut you into pieces. You're not just going to die. You're going to die a painful death. And your house is going to be burned down. There's no other God who can deliver like this. Again, Nebuchadnezzar hasn't given up polytheism. But he recognizes at least who's the head God. And it's not his. There's no God that can deliver like this. Now we could read that and say, well, Nebuchadnezzar said there's no God that could deliver like this. In other words, we could say, well, there's no gods. I don't believe that's what he's saying here. There's no God that can do this. And so you shall not speak against this God. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be continuing to learn about this God when we get to chapter 4. But before we do, we need to know. The king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego again. They had been promoted in chapter 2 at the behest of Daniel. This time, they were promoted by the king because of their own actions that were directly against, like he said, if God is with these men, who am I to be against them? I can't be against them. Plus, we might come along and say, if he promotes these men, perhaps Nebuchadnezzar thought that the God that they serve will be with me. And so we have some ulterior motives probably at work with Nebuchadnezzar as well in wanting the approval of this God. Because this God, if he's for us, there's no one going to be able to defeat us. Do you have something, Bill, before we close? You look like you had something on your face that you wanted to. Well, I've learned to read eyebrows now because I can't read faces.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking back when you were talking about their faith. Sometimes, when we take a stand, we got to be careful that we don't think God's going to deliver us from that position, because these guys are willing to take the stand, and they don't know that. You know what I mean? It's just their faith. No matter what, God will be pleased with what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, they were not concerned with whether or not God would deliver them. They understood he could, but if he didn't, that wasn't going to change their attitude on it. They weren't going to get close to the fiery furnace. Oh, it looks like God's not going to be with us. We'll bow down, we'll bow down. No. They went through the fire and came out unharmed because God was with them and wanted to make a point here. He has made a point with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He's made a point with Nebuchadnezzar's idol. Nebuchadnezzar is going to have another dream in chapter 4 that is going to make the point the third time to Nebuchadnezzar as to who the real God is.
I'm not ashamed to